And I mean, this ties perfectly into what I was going to talk about today in terms of the secret transition to Bitcoin, because this whole thing has been planned for a very long time. And if you don't believe that, I think that I don't know what to tell you. Trump didn't just wake up in 2024 and decide he likes Bitcoin. And so, like, a couple things I had written down on this, and I think this is a good thing to keep going with now that we're on this subject, because this is important. So last year around this time, I came out on the channel and said, Trump is a Bitcoiner. There's something going on here. Trump's a Bitcoiner. He's going to be implementing, when he wins the election, he's going to put Bitcoin on the balance sheet, kind of everything that's happening right now. And a lot of my thesis was based on what Ben was talking about. But there were other things, like General Flynn tweeted about Bitcoin back in 2015. General Flynn, if you don't know, he's kind of been one of Trump's number one guys through the years. So he tweeted about Bitcoin back in 2015 saying, this is the future of the digital economy. Bitcoin is a Bitcoin ATM. You also had Melania, who wished Satoshi a happy birthday a couple years ago on Twitter. At this time, everybody thought that Trump hated Bitcoin. But Melania, his wife, came out and said, happy birthday, Satoshi, shared the white paper October 31st. That was a couple years ago. And then if you think about things like Trump's Uncle John, and if you start digging around in that, because if you listen to the Bitcoin conference speech that Trump gave in 2024, it's sad because most people listen to that speech and they're like, oh, Trump doesn't know what he's talking about. He didn't talk about anything. What a disappointment. He was talking nonsense for 2 hours. He didn't make any big announcements. And if you actually listen, if you go back, I've listened to Trump's speech about 5 or 6 times now, but if you listen to some of the things that he talks about in that speech, there's a lot of hints that he dropped in there. And one of them, the biggest one, I think, was his Uncle John. And he was talking about energy. He's been talking about energy for a while now in terms of Bitcoin being the new oil, the importance of energy, how much the U.S. is going to ramp up their energy after he takes office. And so his Uncle John, he talked about him. And he was a professor at MIT. And did you guys know, this is mind-blowing, and you guys can look this up yourself. If you have like an AI thing, type in who got Nikola Tesla's documents after he died. And I'm not going to make you do it right now, but go verify this. Don't trust me on this. But go type that in. Who got Nikola Tesla's documentation, all of his findings after he died? And look who it was. It was Trump's Uncle John. That's who got all of Tesla's records. So there's something to all of this. And then you think about things that we've learned lately, which is that Eric Trump and the Trumps have known Michael Saylor for 20 years. So I really think that 2025 here, this whole year, our mind is just going to explode. Even the people who kind of have an idea of like what's going on in the world, like what's really behind the curtain, our minds are going to be blown of what's rolled out here and what's introduced to the public. I can't imagine what people who are just like completely in the dark right now, how they're going to feel about everything that happens. So anyways, if you kind of subscribe to that theory, you might not have to buy all of it. I don't really care. But if you consider all of that, and you consider Trump taking office in 11 days, and if you consider the fact that Trump has built his whole team around him are all Bitcoiners. And then you start thinking about like, okay, if this has been a plan in place for a while now, do you think that they're just going to freeball it? Do you think that they're just going to shoot from the hip and hope for the best? Or do you think that, like everything within the military, it's going to be done very precisely and on schedule? So when you really stop and think about things, like there's so many things that make sense within that. And again, you could question it, but I don't care. So then you play out like, okay, so what's going to happen with Bitcoin then? What's the transition here? What's the play? Trump's not just going to buy a bunch of Bitcoin and hold on to it and hope for the best. I really believe that when Trump takes office, he's going to take over the treasury. Apparently, there's already some documentation that he already did back in 2016. Take over the treasury with the Federal Reserve. I don't know. There's just too much stuff to siphon through. But I really believe that Trump is going to be buying Bitcoin, holding it within the treasury, and then the treasury is going to introduce a new US dollar from the treasury, not from the Federal Reserve. Because you have to keep in mind here, if you do some research on what the Federal Reserve is, they're not part of the government. They're a private corporation. They're not federal at all. And they have no reserves. There's nothing there. So how do you defeat somebody like the Federal Reserve? You just stop paying attention to them. Like, what would they do? This is what I like to think through myself, is like, what would the Federal Reserve do if Trump just said, you know what, we're done. We're done with the fiat dollar, the Federal Reserve notes. We're done with that. We're buying Bitcoin. We're using our energy. We're buying Greenland for all the energy. We're buying Canada for all the energy. We're going to start mining Bitcoin. And that's what this dollar, that's what our currency is going to be backed by energy. Henry Ford wanted to do this back in the early 1900s. Tesla was talking about energy and free energy. And there's been so many innovations that have been stomped down by corrupt governments through the last 100, 200 years. So what happens when all that's unlocked? It might happen, it might not. I'm not saying that it's going to be, but I believe that it will be, because they don't really have a choice now. You can't put things back in the box once they're out. So, I mean, in terms of like, what do we do with that? I have no idea. It's just super interesting to me. Super interesting. But here's the thing. If the US comes out and says, we're buying Bitcoin, we're going to add it to the treasury, you can do some math on how quickly the price of Bitcoin is going to go up. And it's going to happen faster than people can even fathom. As soon as the US announces that they're doing that, it's over. We'll never get like, you take $1 of fake money right now, you get 1,000 sats of real money. After the US announces that they're going to be doing this, you might get 100 sats. You might get 10 sats, and then 1, and then $1 for a sat. But there's really nothing that's going to stop that or slow it down once that comes out. So again, this is what I've been saying for the last month, is just like, take everything that you have, look under your couch cushions, search around, sell everything you have, and buy Bitcoin with it. You don't need to take on a bunch of debt. I wouldn't recommend that. I mean, it wouldn't be your worst idea, but responsibly, safely, take everything you have, convert it to Bitcoin, because we're never going to be able to buy this amount of real money for fake money ever again. So thanks a lot, Rick.